So I'll do a little intro. It gives me great joy to welcome and introduce Dr. Harish Hande. Harish is the founder of SELCO India, and he's also the founder and CEO of SELCO Foundation. Both organizations are dedicated to bringing clean energy services to poor rural communities and sort of using clean energy as a way, as a catalyst for eradicating poverty across India. And Harish has done some really amazing pioneering work with both organizations. And in recognition of this work, he was awarded the Magsaysay Award, which is actually recognized as the Asian Nobel Prize for his service to the poor. As many of you know, I also worked with Harish in the very early days of SELCO. And I was trying to think of a story that sort of really captures the essence of Harish. And I have many stories, but one comes to mind especially. So we were driving in South India. We were actually driving to some solar installations that SELCO had installed in this beautiful region of South India called the Nilgiris, which is this amazing, exquisite tropical mountain range. And as we were driving, Harish, we had a colleague in the car, and Harish said, oh, actually, let's stop here. We were on this road surrounded by these beautiful forests and mountains. He said, let's stop here because there's a coffee plantation, a coffee farm, and they have this really amazing small scale micro hydro system, and it's really transformed things for all of these coffee farmers here because they don't have access to the grid. So let's just stop and go check it out. It's some interesting technology. Let's go look at it. So we stop and we end up on this farm, and we speak at the farmhouse a little bit, and then we start walking, and we're like walking. It's lush, tropical, beautiful surroundings, and like about five minutes in, Harish says, in his very sort of calm, cool way, he's like, "Don't freak out, but I think you should look at your feet right now." And we look down at our feet, and they are swarming with leeches. So each foot, and we're not talking like 1 or 2 leeches, we're talking like 15 to 20 leeches on every foot and like swarming up your legs, and like all the leeches of the Nilgiris kind of headed toward us, essentially. And at that moment, I thought, okay, either I'm going to cry or I'm just going to scream or I'm just going to really freak out. But then I looked at Harish, and Harish was just sort of calm as the Buddha. And he's like, well, we've come this far, we might as well just keep going. It's another 10-minute walk. And somehow, just because he was so calm and composed and just kind of matter of fact about it, it felt like, yeah, okay, we can do this. We can just keep walking with these leeches swarming up our legs, and we'll keep picking them off as we go. And so we continued, and we ended up at this microhydro system. And I tell this story, it's an amusing anecdote, partly because it just captures like sort of, I think one thing I really appreciated about Harish is sort of how he could take on any challenge in this very calm and composed way. And I think that was very valuable in the early days when we really did face a lot of challenges. But another thing that I feel like it sort of captures about Harish is that he really leads by example. And what I mean by that is in the early days of SELCO, and even after I left, even though we had a head office in Bangalore, Harish was never there. He was just always in the villages. He really, really built these organizations from the ground up. He really believed in doing the work himself. That was a very valuable lesson to me very early on in my career. I really appreciated that. So Harish, I'm going to hand over to you and just say thank you for all the learning and the fun adventures. I'll hand over to you now.
I was about to say, when are you going to stop? At all. Kamal, sorry. No, Kamal, don't believe whatever Kamal said. It's actually not true. Anyway, so thanks Kamal for doing this, and thanks to your team for starting on this endeavor, I think, which is very, very critical. So I was asking Kamal a couple of times, so should I give an extempore or should I do a presentation? And so I'll mix of both. I will do looking at where it is. And see, today, what she said about the leeches, I think the issue is those leeches are the most harmless leeches in the world. And the actual leeches are humans in many ways. And the way we have looked at disparities and the way we have looked at basically the poor, where we confuse between intellectual poverty and financial poverty. And I think something today we have replaced the old school thought of colonization with the middle class and upper middle class colonization of the poor that is actually happening in the world. That in fact is what I think is the biggest concern. Once we are able to solve that thinking process, we would have absolute immediate solutions to climate in many ways. And so why we pick up sustainable energy, just like if you look at COVID-19 or climate change, the biggest brunt that's going to be faced is by the segment called the poor. The world has gone poorer, agreed. But actually the disparities have increased because the poor have gone poorer by multiple more times than the rich getting poorer. So the gap has actually increased. And with the crisis taking a second phase from today and this week, we're going to actually face much larger issues in the next 3 to 4 months, where, I mean, they say that, I mean, the prediction is that India would have moved by at least a decade and a half. But I think it would be more that the last 15 to 18 years of work, and especially in poverty eradication, has actually been destroyed in one way or the other with the destruction of the ecosystem. The beauty of sustainable energy is that, like decentralized form of solar or any other decentralized form, it democratizes the delivery of health, it democratizes the delivery of education, democratizes that the poor can be innovators and the poor can be entrepreneurs. That today what has happened is I mean, if you come from a country like India, the issue is who gets the money. It's a PowerPoint, Excel, and Word. The non-English speakers have absolutely no chance to actually get the failure monies that all of us would get to do any type of failure in terms of risk investments or a new innovation or an application or an entrepreneurship, right? And that, I think, somewhere decentralized energy breaks that myth, creates a level playing field. It's much more than just environment. The beauty of looking at decentralized energy is it not only puts development at the heart of the subject, but also has the added benefit of solutions to climate. So today we should not bifurcate climate and saying that, oh, it's climate, it's environment, and you need to do good. I think the issue is, unless you do not get social sustainability in order, other orders will act. And the beauty of social sustainability in quality is that the social sustainability and environmental sustainability go in hand. And that's not like this or that, as people keep speaking about. And so that's where I think we've been trying to push SELCO. When we started in 1995, 25 years ago, that time we started more from saying that, how do we use solar as a form of lighting? But I think as we grew over a period of time, we said lighting itself is not the solution. For example, just because somebody has light, I mean, classically in NGO language, or solar lights means education and children are getting educated. That's actually false, because it's not about solar lighting. If solar lighting was leading to better education, then every urban kid should have been smart by now. But the issue is today, it's the ecosystem of education, lighting, schools, teacher, the whole gamut of things. And that's exactly what we need to look at livelihoods, the way we have to look at health services, the way we have to look at education and other social services. And sustainable energy is in the center of that glue. So I just a couple of slides just to what do you call it as to tell what I'm actually trying to say is here. If you look at this, Kamal, you're able to see? You're seeing, Kamal?
It looks like it's still loading, but we see your screen. It's just it's just blank so far.
Kamal, you're on mute.
Can you see?
Yes.
Yeah, Harish, I can see. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, so our whole centerpiece is about how do you look at poverty and how can sustainable energy play as a catalyst to eradicate poverty in a long-term on a long-term basis using. So I mean, for example, what contributes? Climate change, obviously, if you look at Bangladesh, if you look at West Bengal, if you look at central Maharashtra with drought, you look at Brazil, Egypt, lot of the poverty, for example, why does migration happen? Because whether the droughts and the floods, the repeated expenses on housing, no predictability of income in terms of agriculture or anything else. Climate change is very, very linked to cyclic poverty. Natural disasters, I mean, some of them are linked to climate change, but like things like earthquakes and tsunamis, which are not linked, is also has led to skewed development, because today the development is in terms of whether it's too much urbanization or equal resources are not allocated to different pockets to the people, and very exclusive policies. A lot of the policies are not ground up. It's very much what a person thinks at 35,000, and then you filter it down, and the policies are and so much on what you call it as scale, without looking at what the integrities of a process that is required for an intervention to happen in a democratic fashion in the rural areas. Does not, the policies are not, and then obviously, and then the fifth one is social conflicts and war, which leads to poverty. And what we basically mean is that, can we create what you call it as a safety net? A safety net. See, all of us who are on the webinar today, we have an inherent safety net in terms of whether our education qualification or an asset or a house, all are safety nets, that we have some sort of a 90% confidence that we will not go back to poverty, irrespective of what shock happens one way or the other. But unfortunately, 60 to 65% of the world's population does not have that confidence that if any shock happens, they will go back to, not go back to poverty. COVID, push back. Climate change, push back. So what we're saying, that can sustainable energy play a role in creating those safety nets that prevents the people from power. See, now if you look at the poverty line, we all talk about poverty line and stress out. We need to create a social sustainability line here, where we have all crossed that social sustainability line. Even if something happens, we don't fall back to line below it. But today, when people say that people have gone up poverty, it does not mean have they gone out of poverty permanently, because if something happens like a COVID, they go back here. And so if a farmer commits suicide in Maharashtra, the family goes back here. It takes 2 more decades for the family to get back to above poverty. That means you've lost 2 more decades of work, that or the family has lost 2. And what we are saying is, we are saying there are different ways of looking at climate, and poverty angle is a very powerful angle of doing it in a way where we concentrate on processes that scales up. And it's like the ideal situation, I'll see whether I have this ideal situation for us is this: as if the Ministry of Sustainable Energy, Ministry of Energy disappears, and you have sub-ministries in all other SDGs. For example, if I have to look at SDG number 3, how can I link sustainable energy and health? How do I link sustainable energy and livelihoods in SDG 8? It's like Ministry of Energy disappearing in India, but you creating sub-ministries in Ministry of Women and Healthcare, Women and Education, in livelihoods, Ministry of Rural Development. So I don't have to think of sustainable energy as an afterthought, but how do I look at sustainable energy from day one? For example, if I have to look at computerization of rural schools, today, typically what happens is Ministry of Education decides on a computer, and then, so we're going to do 1,000 schools. Oh, by the way, 450 schools are without electricity. Can we ask the Ministry of Energy to provide solar for it? We are saying that's stupidity, because if you had thought from day one, you would have either thought, okay, what is the most efficient way of looking at computers, which computers, what computers, high efficient, look at the building design, then look at solar energy. So it's a combination of, and then most importantly, what type of content is actually required that leads to a better backup of battery. If there's good daylighting, I don't need so much of solar. So you think about solar energy as a catalyst or an input and not the centerpiece. And now you have a quality intervention in a rural school with good building, good computer design, good solar design with after sales service and with content. That's what we need to look at interventions. And that should actually come from the Ministry of Education and not from Ministry of Energy. We're saying that how do we make that categorization to happen? So what we basically into these, we're basically saying that can we shift the beneficiaries, the concept of beneficiaries to being partners. Today, it's not, I'm going to help somebody. Nobody wants help. We need partnership. Why can't the poor be partners with us in these interventions? And how do we create safety nets in terms of assets? These are the women who all own a sewing machine cooperative. Again, it's just it's all an asset that belongs to all the women. Even if something happens, they cannot be thrown out just like what, and they don't need to walk thousands of kilometers. They have their own livelihoods within a radius of 150 kilometers. If you look at here, it's a hammer mill. It's like the hammer mill for, it's a solar powered hammer mill for blacksmith. Initially what used to happen, as you know, they would actually hammer it on a day-to-day basis. This powered by solar not only reduces drudgery, it encourages and inspires the next generation to pick it up. And number three, it also equalizes gender. Because of unfortunate what strength it was required, a lot of women were not blacksmith blowers. But how do we make technology that also is gender sensitive? Now, a lot of the women have picked it up as a source of income of blacksmithing in the rural areas. This is a milking machine, or in this, there's a street vendor who just wants light for 4 hours. He doesn't care whether it's solar. Somebody can deliver those service with the good financing. So it's a packaging of not only the creation of assets, innovation of technology, innovation of finance, and innovation of delivery models with using and you making poor as partners. You make a very robust ecosystem that's very difficult to be what you call it as shaken apart. So just a brief, this is the 4 areas that we focus on well-being, basic infrastructure of health. These are in the livelihoods and in the education. And just to give an example where we are today, when we design a solar power for a sewing machine, everybody says that a sewing machine is, sorry, the solar is expensive. Nobody actually says the sewing machine is inefficiently designed. If the sewing machine was highly efficient, solar would have been no-brainer. But unfortunately, the best friend of grid is inefficiency. The manufacturers do not concentrate on the efficiency of any product because the electricity bill is paid actually by the third party. And so that's what we are saying, that how do we reverse that? And both in health as well as, it's like a dental chair. A dental chair has 150 features. Because it has 150 features, you basically put it in a hospital, guzzles electricity. Even if you gave dental services free, it's not free for the poor to actually drive for or take a bus for 2 days, lose their incomes. It's a heavy transactional cost for the poor to take the dental services. Had somebody given us a DC powered dental chair with only 4 features, foldable, we would have actually taken to the doorstep of the poor, where the poor would have paid 1/5 of what they would have paid for the bus service, and thus democratize the delivery of health using sustainable energy as a catalyst. And that's what we do. And this is and so we basically 4 parts to this organization that we have. SELCO India is a for-profit. It's a for-profit with no individual owners. We have 60 offices. We are owned by 3 not-for-profits, the Lemelson Foundation in the US, the Dune Foundation in Amsterdam, and Good Energy is out of Zurich. There are 3 foundations that own 100% of the organization. We have 60 offices, 600 people. We've been profitable from the last 13 years, and 100% we are not going to be profitable this year. But the way we distribute profits is 20% of the profits is kept aside for employees, and the lowest earning employee gets the first hit at the profits. So the bottom 40% of the employees of SELCO India get profits, and not the top 60% of the employees. That's 20% of the, and another 20% of the profits is kept aside for disaster, in terms of whether some employee has lost a house in a drought or a flood, or a children's sickness or the parent sickness. And the other 20% is kept for education purposes for the kids of employees. For example, out of the 600 people, our turnover of people is less than 2% a year. So a lot of colleagues have grown up with SELCO, and their kids have grown up and now they're reaching 16, 17 and 18. So we've kept the other 20% as an education fund for the kids of SELCO India. The SELCO Foundation was created in 2010. And you think of Google, like the biggest subsidy that Google has got is the internet. It did not pay for the creation of the internet. Who creates that ecosystem of better finance or better delivery or make a research on R&D on blacksmith blower so that energy enterprises and energy not-for-profits in the civil society, the energy not-for-profits would succeed. And that is where foundation was created in 2010 and focused on very much the poorer areas of the country like Odisha, Jharkhand and the Northeast. And also in a way, can we, for example, lots of work that SELCO India has done in Karnataka is not applicable in Manipur. But what we do in Manipur is absolutely applicable in Tanzania, for example, because the financial immaturity is similar. India being a paradox, so an overdeveloped and underdeveloped country, can we take advantage and make India kind of an R&D of business models, financial models and technology in the underserved areas using sustainable energy for rest of the world? The floods in Assam, for example, what you do in resilient housing using technology could be valid for the typhoon hit areas of the Philippines. So the foundation works on those process and implementation of the process and creating the appropriate ecosystem that the process can be replicated, leading to scale. And what I mean by process being replicated is like everybody talks about too big to fail. We are saying that the last mile delivery mechanisms, whether it's a street vendor or an energy access companies, are too valuable to fail. Imagine a vegetable street vendor failing. That means not only his livelihood is gone, her livelihood, it's also that the cost of delivering vegetables for the poor actually becomes super expensive. Same way, energy access becomes super expensive as the SMEs do not exist or they collapse. So in the COVID-19, what SELCO has taken that none of the enterprises that it has, there are 50 other enterprises under SELCO Foundation will collapse no matter what, because it's too expensive for them to collapse and from the end users. Incubation is more about how do you replicate the efforts of SELCO India over to specially, and so whether me, Kamal, Thomas, everywhere were there from the, we all were so-called respected because we spoke English. And we got the monies because we spoke English. And not against English as a language, but we have created another caste system of PowerPoints and English, which is what we said, can we create an incubation which actually encourages local entrepreneurs to actually be ready for failure monies, R&D money, and investments. And that's why the incubation process focuses on the Northeast. And then the last one is SELCO Fund, which is our weakest, but unfortunately is something that it came out of frustration that many of the entrepreneurs that we were incubating were not meeting the criteria of even the impact investors who wanted to know what qualification did they have. And with that frustration, we said, let's start the fund. Let's invest in these organizations in the rural areas of Manipur and Northeast and Jharkhand and show that this is where actual success lies if we truly have to talk about climate change, poverty eradication, and sustainable energy. So these are the 4 parts of the, what do you call it as the, of SELCO. And the way we, and these 4 parts are run very differently with no, what do you call it as, very Chinese walls and hardly any interaction, but learnings are shared. But we believe that that's what an ecosystem means. And if we truly look at climate change, it's not about how many coal is being burned or how much, or if you look at poverty, it's not about are we educating X number of people. And on the other side, the paradox and the stupidity of impact measurement, that how many people have you reached? It's about how are we creating the processes that are long lasting and permanent. So it's not, it's that any individual kid in the rural area or in the slums has the ability to become the next entrepreneur or an innovator in a manner that breaks the social status of a hierarchy of our society. If you don't break the social hierarchy of the society, you will not be able to solve climate change, irrespective of what we say. Because on one hand, we talk about huge consumptions and saying that the poor have to do that. Until you don't break those barriers, the climate change is somewhere of a large, the word climate change itself is a huge climate washing by us. And so we are not going to solve it. We're going to solve it only when we start looking at equality in a truest fashion, where we give the hands of solving them into the hands of the poor. And sustainable energy actually is a very, very powerful tool of doing it. Kamal, is that enough?
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Harish. I think we'll take questions. So just to sort of explain, since we have many people here who are not our students, we're going to first take questions from our students on our Slack channel, and then we will open up the chat and members of the public can post their questions. And Harish, are you able to stay a little longer if needed, like 15, 20 minutes longer?
Yes, agree.
Okay,
Yes.
Great. Okay, thank you. So Eleni, shall we?
Yeah, I'll start with some
hand
of
over
the
to you.
questions from our student Slack. Yes, thank you so much for that introduction to what you do and your perspectives on the intersection of climate change and poverty. I think that's just really compelling and right on with what we've been talking about in our class over the past couple of weeks. So there's some great questions coming in from our learners. So Shelley, would you want to start us off with your questions that you posted?
Hi, Dr. Harish. I have a lot of questions, but so when you first started out, when SELCO first started out, what were the challenges you faced when approaching new community? What kind of oppositions did you face from the governments, and what are the key learnings there?
I think the biggest challenge, I would say, was my own learning. There was no challenges as far as the government or the community was concerned, frankly speaking. It was more about, I think I had to unlearn what I had learned in IIT. I had to unlearn what I did in master's and PhD, then felt that all the degrees were absolutely useless. And then also realized that you went to IIT because 300 million Indians did not write the exam. And so the question is, it's a challenge was us for my own, that I had compartmentalized the thinking process that this is what would happen. I think, and that took me 2 years. It's like when you take an auto rickshaw, or when you are in a local rural bus. If the people don't treat you the same in terms of, if the auto rickshaw driver calls you sir or madam, there is a gap. You will never be able to be part of the solution at all. The question for us, for a lot of us, was it took us time where people would actually consider them that you are one of them. And that, how do you reach to their level? How do you reach to their level of thinking? Like, how do I reach to a level where a farmer actually believes that he can or she can talk to me in the same terms that he can actually talk to a neighbor farmer? And I think for us, education, unfortunately, was a barrier. And that was for me the biggest challenge. How do I convince people that I am just a friend? I'm not somebody who's an outsider. And for that took some years to break. And see, the other notions, people say corruption, people say government. I think those are an excuse of people who don't want to do it. And it's purely an excuse. I think you need to jump the well, find the depth. I think the challenge is one itself, and where we come with perceived brackets and conventions the way we are taught. I'm a mechanical engineer, I'm an electrical engineer, I'm an MBA of finance. No, you need to be a solution provider. Are you a solution provider in the rural area, or a slum, or a street vendor? If she's selling tomatoes for many years and suddenly the tomato prices goes up, is she going to keep quiet and say, sorry, my expertise is tomatoes, I cannot sell anything but tomatoes? Her 3 children will go to starvation. She needs to sell potatoes. There has to, unfortunately, as we get more educated, we get burrowed into our silo thinkings, which kills our innovation to be solution provider. The challenge is, and then how do you then convince other colleagues to behave the same way? So that for me, the challenge was on the middle class thinking of, like, for example, even now the challenges that I face when the youngsters join SELCO, when the parents come to me and say, oh, joint SELCO, social enterprise, will they get a bride to get married to? The salary levels, his cousin is earning much more than that. It's like typically, Shelly, is like, moment you get 96 out of 100, the first thing your parents ask is, where did you lose your 4 marks? Not what we do with your 96. I think that thinking was the biggest challenge, Shelly. Others are something that you enjoy those problems, and I think it's that yeah, the others are not anything compared to this challenge. But if you really want to get into it, jump. Don't even ask the advice of anybody. And the last is, don't ask advice of your parents whether you want to do it. Don't ask this, I want 100 mentors and 300. So the mistake we do is we ask 250 people, should I do it or not do it? Jump. And that's it. That's the only thing you can do.
How do you scale without support from governments? Or what was your scaling model?
Scale depends on 3 things. One is, in the sector of health and education, I know I need to bring in the government. In terms of livelihoods, it's the local financial institutions and entrepreneurship and the last mile delivery, right? So when you talk about scale, you have to first look at who are the stakeholders who are responsible for appropriately putting those pieces of the puzzle together. Now, for example, if I have to look at a blacksmith blower, the question is, what are the 4 things needed for a blacksmith blower? You need somebody to supply you with good technology, the hammer mill, high efficient hammer mill. 2, you have to make sure that the stakeholder, the end user, there are multiple end users who want to take it. How do you publicize that? Number 3 is, are you able to work with different banks to create the appropriate financial product for 4 different type of blacksmith blowers, right? And that's, so once you put these pillars in place, then the scale up, we need to think about not scaling the blacksmith blower or not scaling. We need to scale the processes up. That instead of 1 bank financing, can 200 banks finance it, right? Instead of 1 ITI or a training institute training on blacksmith, we should have 15 to 20 training institutes actually. We always focus on how do we focus on product? How do we scale the blacksmith? And then we forget that these are the processes that are needed to scale up. Once you scale up these processes, the other things actually, so the same banks can then finance a silk weaving or a sewing machine or a home lighting systems. So scale up, think of process mapping and scaling up those processes. Same way government, what we forget is, don't blanket the government as government. There are IS officers, there are champions. Who are the champions in the government? Pick up a champion. The first question we ask an IS officer is, how many more years have you got in that post? 3 years, great. Let's work in 3 years. What can we deliver using this champion? And then fundamentally cement that step in that particular department that no other future IS officers or anybody can change it. It's all the question of how do you pick up champions in the government, and that's why you scale up the processes. Yeah.
Thanks so much for those responses and questions, Shelly. And we're gonna move on to a few of the other ones, but if you want to ask any of your additional ones in the Slack, just repost it and I'll come back to you. Okay, so let's see. Next up we have Benjamin. Ben, when you want to ask your question.
Cool. Thank you, Harish, for the talk today. My question was around kind of the topic of inclusivity. So how can we ensure that new clean technologies are scaled and shared for the benefit of many versus the few?
Fundamentally today what happens, Benjamin, is that it's even in the right frame of mind, inclusivity is only looked from a end user's perspective, that while the other parts of the ecosystem are not inclusive, in the sense that people selling or people creating those products are not part of the same community that is actually going to use it. So it's a 2 different strata of the financial, the economic system that actually is serving. Unless we reverse that, where we reverse it and saying that which is that strata that we are catering to, and can innovations and scale up happen within that strata itself, where the ownership, see how many of us actually, it's like we classically come up with the problems, we come up with a solution and we try to fit a problem to it. We are not owners of the problem. We are only owners of the solution, right? We never feel the social tension of if the problem is not solved, I'll move on to another job, or my deliverable is coming to a blacksmith blower. But I never feel the social tension that if the blacksmith blower is not done, I will lose my income and my family is not fed tomorrow. See, until we don't start owning the problems, we don't feel the tension. So what we are basically saying is, which are the glues in that sector of the inclusion? Like, for example, there is classically, if you look at, where are you from, Benjamin?
I'm from the UK, London.
Oh, from the UK. Just look at Europe, right? The fundamental development of UK and other European countries and US has been because of vocational schools. Okay. And vocational schools are unfortunately considered as schools in India where if you do not get any other option elsewhere. In fact, vocational schools attracts a lot of the people from the problem area sector where they own the problems. If many of these vocational schools are actually reversed, and the same subsidies that you offer to Cambridge or Oxford was actually given of centers of innovation in Oxford, was created in these vocational schools, don't you think a lot of the innovations would have actually happened in these vocational schools itself? They have the makers, they are hands-on, they're not just research paper outputs, right? They are actually hands-on people. And same way in India, we are saying that can we, in mass scale, there are 50,000 vocational schools in India, convert all the vocational schools, at least 20% of the vocational schools, into vocational schools that are not only for skills, but for incubation and innovation. Put in risk monies into those, parallelly work with the banks in the rural areas to collaborate with these vocational schools to not only finance these young kids who come out, but also finance the end users that these young kids will reach out to. And that's where the scale can actually happen. Because the rural banks, as well as the vocational schools, are all owners of the problems. How do we transfer the R&D and the thought process onto people who own the problems? And that's when the scale up actually will happen.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks for those responses. Those are some great points, Harish. Okay, Arthur, you're next up. We have Arthur, then Toril, then Cody in our little question lineup here. So Arthur, go ahead.
Thank you, and I apologize for not having my camera today. I wanted to ask a question regarding the connection of development and climate change. And now that everyone is getting more and more concerned about the amount of carbon we have in the atmosphere, I wonder, how do you see the connection of development, of lifting people out of poverty with sustaining a sustainable atmosphere and climate for us?
I'll take a let's look at COVID itself. The issue of a country like India or Sierra Leone is to make sure that the last mile person has an access to health services. But today, there are multiple issues that those health accesses cannot be achieved. Energy being a very, very critical form. What we are basically saying is that can we push companies like Philips, GE, and other smaller enterprises who are in the smaller equipments to come up with high efficient, whether it's X-rays, dental chair, autoclaves, operation theaters, shadowless lights. Moment they start innovating on low resource settings, the moment you start looking at low resource setting, you start to make sustainable energy as a viable input to set up a health center, irrespective of how remote you are. Using telemedicine and teleconsultancy, you're also negating some of the higher HR that is required to actually go into the rural areas. You can come up with sustainable energy, pushes the thought process of efficiency, pushes the thought process of decentralization of services, which leads to innovation of equipments which would not have happened. If you look at health industry overall in the world is the 5th largest polluter. fifth largest polluter, and nobody's actually looking at efficiency of equipment. The poorer side of the world is going to push innovations of creating equipments in low resource settings that leads to better models of service and better health services, leading to a less carbon footprint. And what's going to happen is, Arthur, is that the poorer part of the world is actually teaching us what efficiency and low carbon world is actually going to look at. And if Sierra Leone, for example, which is 2% electrified, has the highest maternal deaths in the world, 6 million population, can actually blanket it within the next 5 years using solar, decentralized solar, creating X number of maternal health labor rooms with the high efficient equipments with the lowest carbon footprint, and making their 1110 deaths per 100,000 to less than 20 deaths in less than 5 years. So Sierra Leone becomes a pilot. And that same thing can be actually replicated in parts of Paris, London, or Washington. And that's where I believe that the same thing in the drought affected areas of India, solar powered drip irrigation is one. But if there are 7 farmers who buy a pump that is powered by solar, put their money into a storage tank where the water gets stored in the the storage tank during the daytime, and the irrigation happens for every 7 farmers once in 7 days, leads to less evaporation because 40% evaporation happens during daytime farming. So you've created a technology model, water efficiency, efficient storage mechanism, and a community-based thought process of how do I use 1 water pump rather than 7 water pumps. So the poor are actually going to teach us what sustainability truly means, leading to a less carbon footprint today, rather than giving the excuse that so much poverty exists in Africa, Latin America, and India, we need fossil-based backup. That's actually not true. Economics as well as social sustainability is going to be more powerful in challenging those paradigms. I'll just share a screen once for you. What I meant by that, Arthur, is where is my? One second. Sorry. So just to give you a background while I'm searching for it, for example, in Majoli Islands, in Upper Assam, where there are more than it's the largest river island in the world, and what happens is they have so if you can see this, can you see the photograph?
Yes.
Hello. Yeah. So this is it's not a solar powered boat. Everything, what used to happen, this used to run on diesel, and when they go to the islands behind, so there are doctors and nurses. Every 2 days they used to come back, because see, the doctors and nurses, they stayed in the night. There's a young doctors and nurses who are studying for their exam, have to come back to the main line because they have to fill up diesel because the fans and the lights. So first they came up to us and say, could you power off fans and lights because the boat has to be on the whole night. We powered the solar, and where not only the lights, the fans, the operation theater, the autoclave, the dental chair, the vaccine refrigerator, now they're not coming back once, they come back only in once in 7 to 8 days. So not only solar has made them to provide more number of services, but more number of patients. That has actually led to less cost that the Assam government had to spend on these boat clinics. So solar actually made it economical for the government to provide health services. And if you start replicating this concept, Shelley, that you had asked, in terms of boat to ambulances, for example, it would be, it's the same. If you look at the, we have, like, for example, same way in ambulances, right? So you can scale up. It's a mobile. We should not look at how do I scale up the boats? How do I scale up mobility? What is transferred from the boat to this? But if you start looking at these scale up options, you directly link poverty eradication to climate change, and also pushing in innovations of both the delivery of services and I will not get into it right now when the question comes. It's also, how do you redesign buildings is the next one. How do you redesign buildings for more efficiency? But so there's a very strong linkage between poverty and climate change solutions.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was an amazing answer, and one that I'll have to go back to and rewatch, I think, as it relates really directly to so much of our class content recently. Yeah, those were some really powerful examples. So moving on to Toril, do you want to ask you, I think you have 2 questions in the chat, so feel free to ask both of them or combine them or whatever feels most appropriate now.
Thanks, Lene. Thank you so much, Harish. That was so much of inspiration and so much of positive impact. It's like, when can I get out there on the field moment for someone like me? So thank you so much for sharing those stories. I actually have 2 questions. One is, I'd like to really understand if you can elaborate a little more of your work in the northeastern areas of India. You know, how do we kind of navigate that space, the 7 sisters, as they say? And second question is related to, increasingly it is being seen that India is using the renewable energy as a foreign policy tool to exert its influence. In your view, what's your take on the progress that India has made in so far as expanding the renewable energy footprint is concerned?
The first question is Northeast. See, Northeast is, see, if you look at the area of Northeast, it's 45 million overall in the 7 sisters. But if I break it out to Manipur, is 2.6 million with 22,000 square kilometers of area. And same in Meghalaya, is 2.6 million with 22,000 square kilometers. Djibouti, next to Ethiopia, is 22,000 kilometers with 1 million population. So rather than looking at solutions of Karnataka and Manipur, can we look at solutions of Manipur and Djibouti, right? If you look at Manipur and Meghalaya together, is 5.2 million, Sierra Leone is 6 million, with similar issues of health parameters as well as electricity, right? So today, unfortunately, country boundaries are made by man-made boundaries, and we are deciding on the, suppose we had a fight, we had a war from outside, from Mars. We're not going to talk, Indians are going to fight the Chinese or the Americans, right? It's a war against humanity. There are 2 things that are war against humanity, that is climate change and poverty. And we need to, and we are negotiating, unfortunately, on carbon footprint on the basis of country boundaries, which is ridiculous. It cannot, I mean, and so what we are saying is there a way that Northeast becomes a hub of sustainable solutions for the world? Whether you talk of the rice growing plains of Assam, how can the replication or exchange happen between, say, Ethiopia, Philippines, and Assam per se? And the floods of Assam is very similar to when the Nile floods or the typhoons in Philippines, for resilient housing structures to actually happen. So for us, the way we are looking at Northeast is, number one, how do we create solutions that lead to local solutions, local ownership, and local entrepreneurship? Many a time, unfortunate migration that has happened of the skilled forces and unskilled forces from others to Delhi, Bombay, elsewhere. And these are young, bright kids who are unfairly brought to other parts of the country just because they are fairer in color and they speak English. That's so racist in a different manner, right? In a sense, but how do we create an ecosystem within the Northeast where so we are looking at, see, Assam is very different to Manipur, which is very different to Meghalaya. But the solutions of these 3 states per se, and I'll talk about Tripura, Sikkim later on, are itself highly valuable for the other poorer parts of India as well as other parts of the world. So what we've done is we've created, we've got an office now in Guwahati. It's been 3-4 years, and in Manipur. Manipur, we have taken up multiple challenges of, it is 32nd, it's the last in the country in terms of financial maturity of financing. We are saying that how can we blanket Manipur? What is Manipur's SDG goal of 2030? Can Manipur and Meghalaya come up with appropriate SDG goals that are implemented, and not much monies are required for those 2 states to be blanketed by 2030? So what we have done is created a 10-year strategy for Meghalaya and Manipur with the ambition, can we blanket all SDGs by 2030? then work on Tripura as well as Sikkim, and Assam more as an entry or a gateway into the Northeast. But in terms of problems, it just keeps you awake because of the diversity, the language, the tribal structures. But that's reality. We can keep complaining. That's reality. But that reality also gives us a huge option. Exactly, Tanzania has 150 tribes in one area. The same solutions that you do as a process, not about a technology solution, same process of community behavior, you can actually start working in Tanzania in different way. How do you pick up? So we have picked up Northeast as a hub for the world, and that's how we are working with there. The second question is renewable energy. The issue is, it's not about renewable energy. I think today what we are saying is just because your building has 10 kilowatt of solar does not give you the freedom that I'll have 20 air conditioners. See, sustainability is not about having solar power. Sustainability is about design of the building, consumption levels, as well as solar power. It's not one part of it. Oh, just because I have solar power, can I buy everything else in the world? No, that's not sustainability. I think the leadership that India can actually take is more about solutions using poverty eradication in a socially and environmental sustainable manner. That's where the leadership should be, not about just renewable energy. Renewable energy alone is not going to lead to climate change, because, I mean, simple thing, if I put solar in a desert, just because the land is not valuable, who's going to put water to clean the water tables, and who's going to put the cost of water on sustainability to clean those solar panels? The best form of renewable energy is always the decentralized way. It's not the way that we do. I mean, look at what PNG, I don't know if you followed yesterday, right? I mean, come on. I mean, grid has no, and also one more thing, Gaurav, we're also saying that what does off-grid and on-grid mean? When people say so many million people are on off-grid, we are saying that why are 700 million in India still on grid? I'm not able to understand why they are still on grid. Because they are on grid, you're making it too expensive for people off grid to actually have appliances that are high efficient appliances. United States, parts of United States, I'm not saying Massachusetts or Germany are completely going off grid. In a sense, the rooftop is a different form of off grid. And I think we should get away from this word. Off grid means like this second category, right? 300 million people off grid. We say 700 billion people are stupidly on grid. Why are they? So
great one. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I love that reframing of the off-grid, on-grid. As someone who lives in an off-grid tiny house, I do feel like I'm leading, not, you know, way behind or something in the dark ages. So yeah, that was a great answer, great series of answers. Cody, do you want to ask your questions?
Sure. Yes. Thank you so much. So the question I have is somewhat, you know, barring a full enlightenment of the private sector around sustainability, and obviously we can hope that the private sector continues to evolve how it operates. But I'm curious, where does the private sector help your efforts, and where does it hinder your efforts?
See, the private sector, civil society, all again man-made structures where the incentives are in different ways. The private sector, it's very similar to, I think Shelley's question was on scale up. Moment we get some champions in the private sector who think that this is where it should do. Like, for example, if you look at Mr. Jamshed Godrej, who is the head of Godrej Industries, he is very gung-ho on efficiency of appliances, and he's ready to put in any resources to say that efficiency, they are very high quality in refrigeration. And they say that if we can actually put the same engineers into refrigeration for low resource settings, but he thinks of low resource setting not only from a poor centric perspective, from any centric. Should we be low resource in the first place? So the private sector, it all depends on who are the champions that do, because I also feel the challenges in the civil society. Because in the civil society, Cody, as I have got more challenges, is like, Harish, wait, my funder will not allow me to do that. Oh, my funder tells me not to do that. Oh, I don't have the flexibility. So if the funder had to do it, why didn't the funder start its own NGO? Why are you actually having a different society in one way, right? I think it's all about champions and the I think the push, the negative side has been, for example, people think that the California tech success or a failure can be replicated for any other part, and saying that the investments and the scale up strategies that have happened in California is the same thing that can be applied to any other sector, without realizing that the net IRR of California is negative. So somebody is bearing the bloody losses. The question is, it's 9 out of 10 companies go bust. That leads to organizations like Google all to succeed. But in our case, people expect 9 out of 10 organizations to succeed without putting the expensive monies for that failure. I mean, the same example, Google's success is because somebody else paid for the internet. If internet was not being paid or subsidized, Google would not have succeeded. So the private sector also has to realize that, oh, when they come, the negative is like subsidy is a bad word, but a tax incentive is a great word. But I don't know the difference between tax incentives and subsidies. It's the same thing on the balance sheet, for example, right? So I think the private sector also, and also there's the recently is like, people say that people from private sector are more efficient. So the question is, if you have to get in efficiency, get people from the private sector. I can actually give counter examples of how inefficient they are. And that would not have led to world today is if today, the day the COVID started, you don't throw thousands of migrants outside. That shows the inefficiency that you had not built in the structure. I think it's more about a mindset code. I would go back to educational institutes that create this barrier of private and public sector. Are we creating managers who think socially? Doesn't matter they join the social sector or the private sector. Are they thinking holistically when they're, and that is where I would pick up the MBA schools to be the culprits rather than the private and the public sector.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Harish. Okay, I'm going to turn over to a question from the public audience. Let's see, Arjun, if you're here and able to unmute yourself, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Absolutely, thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, it's great to be here, and it's always nice to hear you, Dr. Hande. I don't know, you may not recall, I'm currently in Madrid, but I used to work in Delhi, and I used to be, I co-founded a rooftop solar company. We were on grid, unfortunately, but we were doing rooftop solar at that time, and we did that for 5 years. And I mean, I relate very strongly with what you were talking about in terms of this on-grid and off-grid sort of divide. One of the reasons why we stayed in the urban sort of sector was because we couldn't really figure out the tweaks that we needed to make for rural electrification to really work in terms of a business model. And unfortunately, that's not my question. I think that one will take a much longer sort of a chunk of your time. Now, my question actually is to do with what you were talking about today. I found it extremely interesting what you were talking about in terms of 3 things that really stood out to me that you mentioned. One was social hierarchy, unlearning our learnings, and the third thing had to do with social innovation. And I think to my mind, that's something that's very interesting. I was actually in a talk yesterday where they were talking about cognitive biases and heuristics, and what you said actually speaks to me in terms of how you can use something like, design thinking to actually circumvent social behavioral change and the nudges that really need to happen. And that's actually the bulk of my question, is that would you be able to give us maybe some tips and tricks as to how we can actually do these things to do with social hierarchy, to do with unlearning, and to do with actually facilitating the social innovation? Because I think that's where most people actually get tripped up. And I think a lot of business models can actually be spawned just from these 3 things alone.
See, thanks, Arjun. A lot of people don't believe that, a lot of people think that we have a strategy. We actually don't have any strategy in SELCO. And our strategy is very simple. We don't take resumes for hiring. So what we basically say that, do you have a common sense and passion? And doesn't matter, and your salary structures are not defined on which college or where you graduated from. For example, like we keep saying, right, in the sense that if you and me did a PhD on paddy, we will be called experts on paddy, but a farmer doing 45 years of paddy will not be called an expert because Arjun and Harish have a PhD degree. right? And they are more experts than a farmer who has done 40, cumulative, even 1,000 farmers. We will have to speak to 1,000 farmers. We will be on the panel, but they will be sitting down, 1,000 farmers, right? See that thinking, right? The educational racism that we talk about, like, is what we need to break. And we said, we'll not take in. And we also said, while it was called a little bit of a challenge, idealistic way back in 1995, 96, we basically said, you could report to anybody, in a sense that you could be reporting to in education qualification 10 times less than somebody who are, your salaries would be much less. Doesn't matter whether you're a 4th grade dropout or an MIT grad. And so we started, now we have around 600 people in SELCO India. Out of the 600 people, 590 people come from the client base. Okay, there are 590. The CEO comes from the client base, right? And so who runs? And he's unfortunately more known in the US than in India. But he's English, but he speaks Kannada. When he speaks Kannada, Swamijis don't speak because his Kannada is so much of a higher level, right? And so he manages 600 people. I have no idea what the education qualification of Mo. He's the CEO of the organization. The deputy CEO came to me and said, let's work together. When he was 19, at the age of 20, he wanted to leave because he was very poor. And he said, my parents are very poor. We said, boss, we'll open an office in your house. Okay, I really don't care. If you are leaving, I will also leave. Right? He said, no, I'm a 10th grade dropout. What will you do with me? Boss, what 10th grade dropout? Now he's the second in command. He runs 60 crores, himself a portfolio, right? So we said, boss, let us break this mix of hiring people on the basis of education and break those barriers that if you can't report to somebody who's less qualified, then you don't fit into the philosophy. Also, second thing we do is we also make sure that the partners realize that. And if partners do not respecting my colleagues because they don't have a certain, we do not have that. And I remember once with a chairman of a bank, who was financing us, we cut off a relationship because he treated my technician colleague, saying that he should not have come, at least a managerial level person should have come, we actually publicly broke a relationship. That led to a lot of respect for our, in a sense, for the other side. We need to stand clear from our colleagues, and that's our hiring process is very, very straightforward. And also salaries. We also tell people this is a salary, and we cut off. And the second, what we do is that we have 6-day working. We say that the day the poor get Sunday holiday, we will get Saturday holiday. The poor do not have holidays because we take holidays, and that's the problem. Why have they to work 7 days? Have we ever seen a poor man jogging? Have you ever seen a poor man actually going for a movie saying, I'm worked out, I'm overloaded? Why? That's because unfortunately they are working for us. And that is not right. And it's mostly a selection procedure where we do a two-bit interview process, and then we say, boss, inclusivity has to be within ourselves and how the partnerships are also built on.
Well, thank you for that. It's always great to hear you. I'm so glad that I was able to tune, even though I'm not a student, I'm so glad that I was able to tune into this and be part of this session.
Yes, thanks for that question and response. And there's one more question from the public Zoom chat. Do you have time for maybe one more or so, Dr. Hande?
No, I have. Please call me Harish. Doctor sounds like somebody else.
Okay, well, yeah, I just recently got my PhD, and it's jarring when anyone calls me Dr. Signer. So yeah, Harish, I'll turn it over to Mekin from the public audience if you would like to ask your question and unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. So Harish, I've moved from the VC-backed startup, high growth, high risk stage to working in with street vendors, small business entrepreneurs, and running a social enterprise. My question to you is, what are the largest challenges you've found to decentralization? I think I find a lot of power in the idea, in the theory of it. In the practice of it, I encounter a large number of challenges, and I'd love to hear your perspectives on challenges you face and how you've dealt with them.
No, I see. Initially, the challenge is always finding, irrespective how decentralized somebody is, there is a glue. Whether you work with the local rubber farmers, the glue becomes a rubber society. Or if I work in Jharkhand and Upper, it becomes the Ramakrishna Mission is the glue, for example, right? Or if I work with the street vendors, there is always some, like for example, if there is whom do they buy the vegetables from, right? Is there a glue? Or who are they actually taking the money or the design of the cart? There is one or two institutions that are centralized in one way or the other. And we pick that centralized. And for that, actually, I'm the wrong person to actually go and meet that happen. So it's either my colleague Prasanna Hegde, when he goes and stands there, people think he's another street vendor, right? And they start talking to him in the same language and same issue. Okay, if I have to go forward, I'll pick up 5-10 street vendors. And like, for example, I'll tell you, there's when we started in 2003 with working with the street vendors, and we had this guy Murugesh, who was a very poor street vendor. He said, I'm losing money. Can you just give me 4 lights that I can rent out to 4 other street vendors and make money a little bit? Then we did that. And then he said he wanted to grow to 10 and the bank was not willing to finance. What we did, we put money in the bank against a guarantee. And now he's 250 street vendors that he serviced to. He's himself bought an office where we have moved in with an office after 15 years. But he's a centerpiece for all the 150 street vendors, right? This is the financing. What is that glue? But I am the wrong person I could have done it. Actually, I was the wrong person in 98. Then slowly, somehow people between 2012, which was my best years where people actually thought I was a farmer or a street vendor or an auto rickshaw driver. And moments I joined the foundation and started traveling more internationally, I lost that. I've become so-called on the other side again, unfortunately, that people, but how do you pick up people who can speak that? And I would pick up who's the leader among a street vendor, and some of my similar colleagues would speak to them and said, what is actually needed? Some of the rural bankers are brilliant, who come from the agriculture. Some of the ITI professors or teachers in ITI are brilliant in actually breaking that social barrier to find the glue. And so for decentralized, we find out people who are the decentralized people itself who are leaders in those pockets to make that happen. It's more of a social challenge. It's not a technical or a technology or any other. It's a social.
Thank you.
Thanks,
We should
Harish.
speak offline sometime, Mehek. What are you doing? We'll be very interested in the street vendor.
Love to.
Yes, and we had one other follow-up to your response to Arjun's question about whether you see anyone following SELCO's lead in that sort of model of advancement within your career irrespective of educational achievement, and cutting off relationships with people if they're not respecting the social innovations that you all are pioneering.
Within SELCO Foundation, there are quite a few people. And one of the biggest losses, I would say, is one of the biggest mistakes Kamal did was to leave this sector and go to and settle down in Hawaii, I would say. But no, jokes apart, I would say, yes, there are quite a few people for example, in our own organization, but also if you look at the model of Seva in Gujarat, if you look at the Self-Employed Women's Association, which has created Ilaben, a pioneer and a legend in the social entrepreneurship, when they started the labor union in the 1970s, but the umbrella organizations has 110 organizations underneath: Seva Rural, Seva Housing Trust, Seva Bank, etc., etc. All of them have individually spawned who broken the concept of inclusivity in the way they have spoken about. So, or Pradhan in India, or you could Sagot, maybe parts of Sagot in Tanzania. same ATA in Ethiopia. There are quite a few examples in the agri-base, in the agricultural sector that have happened, but not in the energy sector. But energy sector had a lot of those people in the mid 70s, the energy sectors. The earlier pioneers of sustainability, whether you talk about Europe or whether you talk about the California hippies, many of those broke those barriers, and who truly talked about sustainability in the form of inclusivity was in 70s and 80s. And as soon as we got replaced by as solar became cheaper and you got more of the tie and suit guys, people coming into, the inclusivity went away. And we got to bring that back.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's actually sort of encouraging to hear that there has been times when it's been more of a model in the field to be so inclusive and socially innovative in terms of just getting the sustainability work done.
If you look if you look at examples like Dennis Hayes, right, the founder of Earth Day, okay, Carl Pope, who was former Sierra Club head. If you look at Mary Houghton, the founder of Shore Bank in Chicago, right, all these are legends in true form. Though they were behind whether Sierra Club or Earth Day or you talk about Shore Bank, the fundamental basis on which they all started the movements was on inclusivity, if you look at. So
that's great. Yeah, that's a great sort of semi-final point. And if we can just wrap up on your final thoughts on advice for our students as they find their way into climate-related work. There's a lot of motivation and ambition, but I think still a great desire for advice. So anything you want to share to them as they move forward on this journey would be great.
No, I think it's COVID-19 has again proven that decentralization and climate related solutions are much more critical. So please don't let people hijack saying that we need growth and we need economic growth. And so that's why we need to go back to fossil. The COVID has eroded our economy. I think we are digging our grave further by listening to those. Also, I think somewhere we lost the charm between activism and doing. We've gone either becoming hardcore activists, but we are not being doers. I think somewhere we need to come up with solutions, and because the solutions are the best form of protest. And I think I would tell all of us is, let's create, even if we can fail, let's put more solutions on the ground, because too many theories and too many papers, like in the cook stove, just an example, there are more papers written than there are enough cook stoves to burn them on. So I think the clean cook stove, in the clean cook stove belt, I think we need more solutions on the ground. So push, guys. Right time to be in. I mean, it was always there, but more than ever.
Yeah, totally agreed. Well, thank you so much, Harish. This has been incredibly helpful and enlightening and thought-provoking. So we really appreciate you coming to join us and giving a guest talk.
Thanks.
From me too, Harish. Thank you so much. Yeah, brilliant, as always.
No, thanks, Kamal. Thanks to everybody. Bye.